My wife cheated while I was deployed to Afghanistan. I wish I had known these forums existed when I went through the hell of finding out my wife, now my ex, was having an affair while I was on my last deployment to Afghanistan. Not that I would wish the experience on anyone, but I have found it helpful to hear from others who have had similar experiences and to know that I'm not alone in feeling the anger and pain, even years later. So here's my contribution. Even though all of our normal bills had been put on auto payment prior to my deployment, I would occasionally log in and check balances just to make sure everything was tracking and getting paid as it should. Money wasn't an issue, but I knew that between my wife's demanding job on a local military base and multiple kids to look after, something could fall between the cracks. On a whim, I opened up the Visa or debit card and started scrolling through the transaction history. The transactions were mostly routine, a few too many dinners out, but it's not easy being the parent managing things with a deployed spouse, so I wasn't going to say anything. Then I noticed a transaction that surprised me, an airline ticket to a tourist destination on the other side of the country. The trip was scheduled for the next month, even though I had almost 6 months left on my deployment. The transaction had been processed several weeks prior. I tried to think of a good reason for my wife to book that flight and not tell me about it. It could not have been a work trip, not only because of the destination, but because government travel does not allow you to use your personal credit card. During our next Skype opportunity, after the kids were out of earshot, I casually mentioned the airline ticket and asked my wife what that was about. She hesitated and asked me how I knew about that. She never did the online banking and was apparently unaware of the level of detail available online. She quickly recovered and told me that all of the stress of dealing with the kids by herself caused her to accept an invitation for a girls' mental health retreat with some of her female coworkers. I told her I understood she might be stressed, but still, it seems like traveling across the country and leaving your kids at home without another parent might be something that we would have discussed before you purchased the plane ticket. Then I asked her who would be taking care of the children for the week she was gone. She responded that a 16-year-old neighbor girl would be watching our children, all of whom were young, with the youngest still in diapers. I replied that if there was not a responsible adult in the house taking care of the children, that I would personally notify Child Protective Services. So she quickly agreed to ask her mother to drive up and watch the kids. Of course, the reason she would be so reckless as to get a child to watch our children for a week was because her mother or any other adult might ask questions about the trip. She told her mother and the children that it was a business trip. But once I discovered the trip, she could not use that excuse with me because, as a service member and therefore a government employee myself, I would have seen right through that lie. Hence the girls' retreat line. I halfway expected her to cancel the trip if it was not legitimate, because who in their right mind would go through with an affair trip once the spouse had discovered the tickets? But whether it was because she felt locked into her story and had to go through with it, or she simply wanted it so bad she was rationalizing that she would not get caught, she did get on the plane. When I was not able to reach my wife the day before the trip, I called my mother-in-law to check on the kids, and she told me my wife had left earlier in the day to spend the night in a hotel next to the airport. That was a little unusual since we had flown out of that airport many times on vacations and never had any problem driving the 50 miles the morning of the flight. Also, no hotel charge ever appeared for that night. I also kept waiting for any hotel charge to appear at the destination, and it never did, even though she was there a week. This particular tourist destination is famous for being expensive, and yet over the course of the week, I only saw 2 charges on my wife's bank card. I could tell from the transactions that she was, in fact, at the destination she claimed to be going to, but how she managed to eat for a week and take in the sights without spending any money was another mystery. She never tried to contact me by phone or email the entire time she was on her so-called retreat, even though I had an Afghan cell phone as well as fairly regular access to internet and the internet.
I asked her to send me some pictures of her and her friends, explaining that it would do me good to see her enjoying herself and recharging her batteries, so to speak. Shockingly, she had not a single picture of a week in a tourist mecca. While she was at her destination, I was in a location with internet access and started reviewing phone logs. I found one number that she was sending and receiving calls to many times per day, including the middle of the night. The phone calls would often last over an hour. And these phone calls started not when I was in Afghanistan, but when I was in another state for a couple of months doing training for the deployment. I was essentially on the deployment because there was only a weekend back at home between the training and the deployment. I figured I had given her enough rope, so I started pressing her for the names of her friends that went on the trip with her. When she told me that all of the friends except one had backed out right before the trip, I knew she was panicking. She was trying to simplify her story. She gave me one name, but would not give me the last name or the department that this woman supposedly worked in. I then said, we will come back to the name of the woman that supposedly went on the trip with her, but we really needed to discuss these phone records. I gave her the name the phone number was associated with. Turns out, that was her affair partner's father. Then I pointed out the fact that going back to the time I began my pre-deployment training, up until the present, she was calling this guy 10 to 20 times per day. The only exception was there were no calls to or from that number after she left for the supposed hotel the night before her trip. And there were no calls to or from that number the entire time she was on her retreat. Furthermore, the calls only started back during the time she would have been driving home from the airport after her return trip. I told her that I found it odd someone who she could not resist talking to a minimum of 10 times a day for a year simply dropped off her phone log the night before her flight when she was supposedly in a hotel near the airport and then resumed like clockwork about an hour and a half after her return flight.
I had to end that call abruptly, but by the next time we spoke, I had confirmed through a friend at that command that there was no woman with that name at her command. I informed her I had proof that the woman she claimed to have gone to the destination with was fictitious, and that we had already established the man with the mystery phone in his pocket was on that trip with her. She eventually admitted that it was a male co-worker, but still claimed everyone else backed out on her, and so it was just by chance that this guy that she was calling multiple times a day for a year ended up being the one on the plane with her. However, once again, she could not provide a single name of a person who would substantiate the story that they had originally been planning to go on the trip. Ultimately, she admitted there was never anyone else except this guy that was going with her. The inability to produce a hotel receipt or show any transaction for a hotel on her bank card forced her to admit that she shared a room with him, but she claimed it was a suite, just two friends sharing expenses. I pointed out that according to the phone records, it would suggest that the same guy spared you a hotel expense the night before the flight as well. I told her she was a liar and a cheat and that I wanted a divorce. She then started wailing like someone that just received bad news on Judgment Day. She then got the kids involved, forcing them to hold the camera so that I could see her sprawled out on the kitchen floor, bawling and begging me not to leave her. I didn't continue the call because I did not want to discuss it in front of the children. For the remainder of the deployment, I would periodically grill her just to watch her squirm and tell more lies that I could catch her in. When I finally returned from deployment and took a cab to the house to pick up some clothes and uniforms, she tried to come on to me because she knew if she convinced me to sleep with her, it would reset the clock on the 12-month divorce waiting period in our state, which had been running since I emailed her that we were separated pending a divorce 6 months ago. I told her that I may have been in Afghanistan for a year, but I still wasn't that desperate. After another week of begging and pleading, she asked me if there was anything she could do to make me consider not divorcing her. She offered a one-sided open marriage so that I could get my revenge. She offered to stay in a sexless marriage since I told her I would never touch her again. I replied that it was a long shot, but if she was completely honest and answered every question, no matter how graphic, then maybe I would consider it.
She started telling me about when they met and the first time they hooked up, but it didn't take long before I was spotting inconsistencies and demonstrable lies in her story. She was clearly lying to minimize her guilt. I didn't point this out at the moment because I wanted to let her spin the whole thing out before I started picking it apart. When I left for the hotel that evening, I asked her if she had stopped all contact with the affair partner, and she said she could if I really wanted her to. I told her that a sane person would not have made that comment, but yes, I really wanted her to, and she agreed. 4 days later, when she thought I was halfway to New York with the kids, I noticed on the locator app that we have on the phones that she was at a restaurant in a nearby city. Since she thought I was out of town, I waited until the tracker showed her back at home, waited a few minutes, and walked in on her and the affair partner in our bedroom. There was only her car in our driveway, so either they drove her car from a restaurant that was over an hour away, or they parked his in a hidden location so that the neighbors would not see.
The affair partner bolted, but my son said, "Isn't that Tom?" Not his real name. And only then did I confirm the guy running down the street was the affair partner. That is also when I realized that not only did my kids know him, they were on a first-name basis. My wife tried to say that he had just come down the hour and a half from where he lives to check out the new bathroom light fixture. She was getting clearly agitated and finally snuck past me, jumped in her car, and left for about 20 minutes. My guess is she picked up the affair partner down the street and transported him about a mile away to a shopping center where his car was probably hidden. I could go on for days with the individual lies that she told over the coming days and months, but we learned through the guardian ad litem in the custody fight that the affair partner had practically been living at our house. The affair partner had picked up the kids from school and daycare. The affair partner, my then wife, and the kids went on outings as a family. Sometimes this guy even took my kids out without my wife. My son even walked in on him in the shower in his mother's bedroom once. After I got full custody, the kids moved with me to another city. I try to be civil and co-parent, but it's not always easy. My ex-wife tried to convince her friends and family that I had been the one cheating, which is absolutely not true, ever. Ever since the divorce, she has begged me to take her back. I either don't respond or change the subject, but whenever she makes that suggestion, it feels like D-Day all over again. I try my best to forgive her because I think she has deep-seated mental issues that contribute to this behavior. I say that because before I met her, she was engaged to a guy that was about to start medical school, and he broke it off after catching her cheating. I can forgive the people that tried to kill me on a regular basis, but I cannot and will not ever forgive her for what she put my children through. Believe it or not, I've only hit the high points, but I hope reading this and knowing there is light at the end of the tunnel might help someone going through the same experience at the moment.